Okay, we should be live. If you're watching in the YouTube chat, just let me know in the chat box if you can see and hear everything okay before we get started. And I'll be
Going, everybody.
monitoring the chat as we go.
Cool. Do you think now is a good time to get into it, or?
Yeah, I think so. I see we got a few people already watching. We have Bing Doodle, John, Felipe, James, and Andrew. Okay, so I'll introduce our guest today. We have Grandmaster Mac Molner. He became GM at around age 25. He's a multiple time New Jersey State chess champion, and he tied for first in a US Open and has played in the US Championship, which is an invite only round robin event. So, welcome, Mac. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Looking forward to going over some of these games. They're pretty interesting. Yeah, looking forward to getting into it here.
So, this first game, we have James playing the black pieces, and looks like a Caro-Kann.
Yeah. Let's check it out. The Caro-Kann seems like one of those openings that just keeps getting more and more popular. So when I played the exchange variation, of course, there's lots of ways they could try it out or try out different lines here with white, but yeah, I think this opening was well played here. So bishop f5 is normal. I think from white's point of view, they should probably try the move h4 here. I think it's probably the most critical one, and it would even probably make the plan they chose in the game a little bit better. But they played bishop d3 here, and from black's point of view, this trade, it's kind of pleasant. You get to exchange pieces while you're slightly more cramped, so it's not hurting you. And yeah, just kind of some natural moves here. Yeah, sorry, I'm a little getting over a little sickness, but c5 seems good. Seems like there's nothing really too major to talk about until maybe a couple more opening moves are done.
It looks like he does have a question
Yeah,
here at move
sure.
8. So James says move 8, a3, the first move he wasn't familiar with. He calculated that he could continue knight g to e7, and after b4, he was analyzing c takes d, knight to c8. And he says black will be able to harmoniously finish development with bishop e7 and knight b6. But this was kind of the first moment where he wasn't quite sure what to do because he was out of theory.
Yeah, actually, I think you chose a very good plan here. So nice job. Yeah, the question is just how do you untangle your pieces, basically. f5 looks like a tempting square, but I think actually, in reality, your knight is better on c8, where we'll be heading towards c4, which is a nice outpost. There's very little that white can do to contest s square, and since your bishop needs a home, once you put on e7, I think it's nice to not have to worry about your knight getting kicked around with something like g4 potentially, because yeah, once the bishop's on e7, your knight won't have that retreat square, and it just seems. I think black actually summed it up really well here. So I think they found a very good plan. And
how important is the open C file in terms of like figuring out where to put the minor pieces here?
Yeah, that's a good thing to take into account here as well. I think for black here, because they're slightly more cramped, it is important to try to have a sense of where your play is going to come from, because if you end up kind of choosing like a passive setup, then you'll probably, like, black might need to do something later, like play f6 to like try to open something up somewhere to like free up their piece a bit more. So the fact that you already have this c file ready, I think it is really helpful for black, and like arranging your pieces so they could kind of coordinate together to use it, I think is a good plan here. And yeah, knight c8 will do that also, because in connection with the rook, you might be able to bring the knight to c4. So
Yeah,
hopefully I answered everything there.
yeah, I think that was good. And I see James is in the chat now, and he says the plan is to overload c4, stick a knight there, and if white advances his pawns on the queen side, you can move one knight to a5 and then stick one on c4. That was his idea. Okay.
Yeah, that seems perfect. Sorry to cut you off again. Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, I like what James is saying, and it's interesting. I saw, obviously I went through the game beforehand, and I feel like the next interesting question is like, okay, so you bring your knight to c8 and then b6. So you have your pieces on good squares, but like, how do you try to go from there after that? And it's kind of interesting to consider whether you should play a move like a5 and try to loosen up some squares on the queen side, or like loosen up white's pawn structure a bit. But I think it makes sense kind of the way it played out. So, but I think like the original plan here is good, and then we can maybe go over some of the specifics after that. But yeah, like bring the knight to a5 if they play b5 makes a ton of sense. So.
And his next node will be coming up on move 14.
Great. Yeah, these moves all seem absolutely normal, good. And yeah, we'll see. So you said he probably has a note here, right?
Yeah, so here he says his plan is to play on the queen side. It's where all of his pieces are. And the move a5 should force white to move his 2 pawns there, creating some additional targets.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. I think he has a good feeling for this position here. I think it makes a lot of sense. I suppose like one other possibility, I'm not saying this is actually correct, but maybe something like a knight maneuver like this could be like playable. It's a little weird though. I'm not sure it's actually improving black's position too much, but the knight is kind of slightly in the way here, so you can't use the c file as easily as you'd like. I don't know, it's maybe just a possibility. If, let's say something like rook c2, a6, not like rook c1. It might be interesting. Something like knight b5. Like you have like very good control of the light squares here, so potentially maybe you could kind of like keep some pressure on this backward pawn. It would maybe give you some easier access to c4 if you can trade rooks. But overall, it seems like black has a pretty pleasant position. So I think there are a couple ways you could play it here. I like a5 though. I think it's a good move. I think the way he summed up the plan makes a lot of sense. So white plays b5, 97. It's pretty natural that white would play a4 here, just connecting the pawns. But at the same time, it does give you access to the b4 square, which may not be the most critical thing, but it increases the scope of your bishop a little bit, which I think could give you some potential to rearrange your pieces here.
James does have a question here on 17.
Sure.
So he played 17 h6, and he wants to know, is there any way to know if you're being too slow and cautious before launching your own initiative? He said he was trying to be concrete and calculate, and it seems like he had time for h6, but his computer didn't like it. What do you think of h6 here? And what would you recommend for a plan?
Good question. Let's see. I think it does seem like black is going to be playing on the queen side here, so you'd have to maybe consider like what your different attempts at like arranging play there would look like. I think the c file seems like a big focus, so trying to get your pieces to the c file quickly, I think would be like a pretty natural thing to think about. The other thing which was jumping out to me is that like anytime you have a badly placed piece, I think it becomes a big priority to try to fix it. So at least it participates and helps your position. So one of my first thoughts when seeing this position would be like, okay, how could I get this knight back into the game? So I I wanted to try something like maybe bishop b4 and then like trading rooks, bringing the knight back around to e7 where it will be able to help much more. So in that sense, I like your move h6 because then in order to play the plan of with bishop e4 and then like bringing the knight back around, I think you really would have to limit knight g5 from white. So I think like on that from that point of view, it makes sense. So I guess it's a matter of maybe like looking at the concrete things in the position, like if there's any tactics and like when to launch your own initiative. But I think it's I guess I have a difficult time answering that question, but it's more about just to me it would be like about improving the quality of your pieces so that you're able to play like the active plans you want. So I think the computer was saying probably to do something like rook c2 trade, and then maybe like queen d7 here. I think this makes a lot of sense also because like you do manage to at least improve your rook, which wasn't helping, and um, you have actually like a weakness here that it's annoying for white to try to protect. So it's kind of like you already have white kind of a little bit on the defensive here. So you don't maybe you don't necessarily need to do anything um, extra to like have some pressure here, which is probably why h6 maybe isn't like fully necessary.
And James just put a note in the chat, said h6 was to control g5 so that he had time to reorganize the queen side. So I think he was thinking of h6 prophylactically, like maybe white's going to go bishop g5 or knight g5 at some point, try to attack.
Gotcha. Yeah, it seemed to be like h6 was used to like maybe rearrange the bishop or something. So I think that part of it makes sense to me. I think yeah, basically it'd be like two plans here for black. It seems like just use the c file or bring the knight back around.
Yeah, I really like your point about improving that worst piece on a7. So it's like we got this monster knight on b6, pressures the a4 pawn. That's tying white's major pieces down, either rook or queen.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's like control the c file and improve that a7 knight.
Yeah, exactly. And from white's point of view, actually, this bishop on e3 is pretty lame piece. Doesn't do a lot. The knight on d2 is more defensive. It's not really doing a whole lot, and white has some space, like a space advantage, but it doesn't do much as long as black's pieces can get to active squares. But probably should keep going here.
Yeah, his next question will be
it,
coming on move 29, just so you're aware.
sounds good. Yeah. Yeah, this part looks really good. Well, white kind of gave black well, I don't know if gave the pawn is the right way to say it, but black's already made some progress here clearly, so managed to pick up the a pawn. Things are looking pretty good here. Yeah, just as like a little note, I guess the next comment is coming up on 29, but I thought probably at this point it should be easiest if you just trade queens and protect the b pawn. Like without the queens on the board, white has no real attacking chances. The b pawn here is falling quickly, and the queen side pawns are just so overwhelming. I think you probably make it a little easier on yourself if you just simplify a bit, but also take away the chance of like I don't need just like no counterplay for white here basically. Just looks really good for black. But yeah, let's keep going to your question. Oh, this was interesting too. So there was a point here where, yeah, after queen 8, so white actually has a tricky move. Always pays to look at the tactics, but they have rook f7.
Oh.
Which, yeah, it's like so annoying to face a move like this. Looks like black has total control of the position, and it's like, where does this come from? But yeah, still black has a big advantage even after trading because this a pawn is just so valuable here. But white could make things more challenging with this idea.
James agrees with you in the chat, by the way. He's like, yeah, that was a mistake. I should have traded queens and play rook b8.
Gotcha.
So on 29, he played rook to c8. And he said, how would you have handled this situation? Is trying to achieve piece trade's the correct strategy, or should I be pursuing something else, like perhaps pushing my passed pawns at all costs? So should he trade or
Yeah,
try to push the pawns?
yeah, it's an interesting question. I think trading can be a good idea. It's probably just that the specifics here in the position don't really allow it to work well. And once again, like just in terms of like how to like forming a plan, and I think yeah, generally speaking, it's just to kind of achieve like maximum activity for your pieces. So sometimes if you do that, it'll kind of coerces your opponent into like wanting to trade just to deal with your active pieces. So to me, yeah, like probably knight c4 would be the most sensible, just getting the knight more active. And then I kind of like actually just having your queen on a8. I know I guess before there was that tactical issue with the rook um, being able to take, but if you could get your queen here, I think it's really well placed, and then it's going to be kind of simultaneously helping support a4, maybe like nudging them into trading queens, which would help you. Sorry, so I kind of like the way you have arranged your pieces, but the I guess the bishop is like a little awkward here because anytime you start pushing your a pawn, then the bishop is a little loose. Maybe you could try putting on c3. It's actually kind of hard to attack there, and then you can start pushing your a pawn with your queen on a8 potentially. I think the issue here is also that like after rook c8, like the intention of trading pieces makes sense. It's just specifically like your pieces end up getting like pretty discoordinated here. So you end up in this pin, but also the knight and queen are awkward right now, and then it's hard to get them rearranged. And actually, white missed a chance here because they could have played bishop d2, which puts pressure on the pawn. Actually, it's not really possible to keep the pawn at this point. If black pushes it, it's covered, and if something like queen a8 trying to protect it, then everything gets overloaded here.
Oh, that's
So
nice.
I think it's more just like that it does like the idea of trading just doesn't work here because it makes your pieces a little passive and discoordinates them a bit. So hopefully that answers it.
And then when he gets to move uh, between moves 39 and 43, James was under some time pressure. And he does ask if you have any advice on managing the stress of time pressure so that proper candidate moves can be found. So that's moves 39 to 43 coming up.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, when you say time pressure, I'm just curious how much time exactly. Like maybe that could be useful to know.
Okay, I'll see if he says anything in the chat.
Sure. It's hard too in this position too. It's like a very concrete position. White has this like very specific like knight h5 and perpetualing. If it was like a less chaotic position, I think a lot of times you can go with a more like simple approach to trying to find your candidate moves, like just work on using a couple of positional questions which can be helpful, like which pieces need improvement, what's my opponent's idea. Like if you can quickly identify your opponent's intention from the last move, it yeah, I think it will help you like quickly like make a candidate move to deal with it fast. Also, so basically I like to use these three questions I learned from a Jacob Agar book, which was what are the weaknesses, worst place piece, and opponent's idea. So like those three things are really valuable like at any point basically. So once again, it's just weaknesses, worst place piece, and opponent's idea. So if you kind of keep track of those throughout the game, even in time pressure, I think it's like just having some things to identify can like help you reach some candidate moves quickly. So hopefully that might be helpful.
That's really good advice. And he says he had 1 minute left with a 5-second increment.
Okay.
So almost
I
blitzing.
mean, yeah, it's really hard. And it looked like you were starting with 15 minutes here, so it's like you're kind of like bound to get into time pressure at some point. That's like the worst possible place for it because it's such a crazy position.
Yeah, and he said he
But
couldn't find bishop to d2 at the end.
okay, yeah, I actually didn't. Do you mean like when we were just looking at it, or coming up at some point?
I think it's maybe coming up. Let's see.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. I guess the computer was saying bishop e7, which was. I wonder if that might be what he was talking about. At some point, bishop e7 was a. Oh, oh yeah. Like, yeah. I think the computer was saying you could just. Sorry, I know I had looked at something where like this idea was possible.
Might have been 43.
One
There's
sec.
bishop a3
Okay,
played and bishop e7 was a
uh-huh.
possibility.
Okay, so yeah, it might be the same position then. Oh yeah, yeah, that was it. That was it. Bishop e7, queen e8, and then this move knight b6. So I mean, good luck, luck finding this with a minute left. I can't even explain how you would try to find this, or like it's just completely like just computer tactics to like have all these things hanging together, and then to top it all off at the end, like when you capture this knight, you happen to prevent like checks on d8 here too, which is like really helpful. So yeah, I think that was just like pure tactics and calculation that there at the end, especially in stressful time pressure. I have, I think it's just that's such a difficult variation to see, but yeah, I'm not really answering how you could hopefully see it, but it's just that was kind of like a freakish variation. So
Yeah, and if you can
yeah,
avoid having your king opened up, that'll help quite a bit in time pressure, but sometimes you don't have that opportunity. And he
yeah,
does
that's a good
say
point.
bishop he did mean bishop e7, not bishop d2.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Should we go to game 2?
sure, sure.
Thanks, James, for
Uh,
submitting that one. That was a really good game. I love seeing
yeah, that was
Caro-Kanns
nice.
too. This is now
Yeah,
side.
I've called the Caro-Kann the Sicilian mouselet variation during the pandemic. Because like I used to be such a diehard Sicilian player that on occasion, like when there was all we could do was play chess over the internet during the pandemic, I accidentally played the Caro-Kann once or twice. I was like, man, but actually it's a pretty good opening. It's actually, you can definitely play for like all results. You can win with it, but
See,
it's still solid.
you might not
I
know
hate to
this,
admit
Mac,
it.
but like our very first course that we made was the Caro-Kann for Black, and probably our most common YouTube video is like something Caro-Kann related. So we have like a lot of Caro-Kann players in the chess goals community.
That's great. That's great. It's a good. It's actually really a good opening for to play for a win. It creates like an imbalance all in it, like in any variation. It's like the new Sicilian in a way. It's like fight play for a win.
Okay, I have a request. Could we go to
Sure.
could we hold on this game for a little bit? Bob said he might come just a little bit later. Maybe
Okay.
do, yeah, that one.
Sure.
So this is Bonafide is Andy. He's playing the white pieces. And I did see him in the chat earlier. We'll see if he's still
Cool.
around as we go.
Cool. Yeah. Actually, I enjoyed looking at this game too. You end up getting a structure, which I've got in a lot of my games. I usually get this like Maroxy bind type structure from the Accelerated Dragon, but uh, yeah, I guess you can even get it here if they decline the Smith Mora. So this is all completely normal. I think you mentioned that in your notes. And I liked everything you did here. H3 seems very good. It helps prevent potentially like a bishop trade. This light square bishop for black doesn't usually have good prospects, so it makes sense to prevent a trade. So this all looked, yeah, good. It's a small point, but I was even considering here instead of bishop e3, which you played, which is a totally fine move, to maybe play bishop g5 instead. It doesn't really make a giant difference, but I was thinking if black allows it, you could play queen d2 here, which is a kind of like pleasant battery in case you ever want to play bishop h6 at some point. But the main reason why I would recommend playing bishop g5 is because I would like to induce black into playing h6, which kind of softens up their. Sorry, I'm getting a friend request constantly on chess. I don't know if you can see that.
We
Is it
don't
popping up?
know. It doesn't
Okay,
show up at
okay,
all.
okay. We're trying not to like get distracted by it. Okay, cool. So yeah, I was hoping. Well, I would do this just to try to get black to weaken their king side and give you like a little bit of a target to play against with queen d2. It loosens up their king side a bit, so it might cause them to play king h7, and I'd like to get their king lined up with their bishop. Maybe gives you some tactical opportunities at some point, but also might keep this bishop tied down to this pawn, and it will kind of prevent some activity later on. So it's a small point, but well, the funny thing is that your opponent just plays h6 anyway, which I think kind of helps you. So,
I like that
well,
point because it's like not something that's intuitive. When you start playing, you think that's a wasted move, bishop g5. It's just getting kicked. But yeah, like you said, it softens up. And then Andy's in the chat. He's playing white here. He said, yeah, inducing
sure.
h6. Makes sense. He does have a
Cool.
kind of a general question for the opening.
Mm-hmm.
He said this is a correspondence game, and he uses the appropriate book, course, or database until his opponent deviates, which helps his results. But would you recommend it's better to just play based off of his memory for the correspondence games in the opening?
I like the way he's doing it. I think you probably want to use the best resources you can, because I would assume your opponents are doing that too, and then maybe once you both are out of book, you can kind of like put your thinking to test. But otherwise, I feel like you might like give yourself like a little disadvantage. Depends, I guess, also if he's trying to like transition from playing correspondence to also playing over the board tournaments. If that's the case, then it might make sense to use it, like use the opening as a way to just practice recalling all the moves. Yeah, so I think if that's the case, it could make more sense to do it where you try to just play from memory. But either way, I would say like if you play with the right correspondence resources and then review your game afterwards, hopefully that would just reinforce the right move. So I guess what I'm trying to say is probably it's not necessary to do it from memory. You can just get a benefit from reviewing it later on anyway.
And
That makes sense.
you could test your memory as you go, like just guess the move and then look it up. And if it's wrong, then really try to hammer it in.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. I liked one of his comments that was coming up later about like which pawn structure to reach, because I think it's a really good question.
Oh yeah, 17.
Yeah, I would have, instead of put the queen on e2, I probably would have put on d2 here. I know I mentioned that a little earlier, but it seemed a little more natural to have it on d2, maybe keeping c3 a little more defended. Also, I think it's a common plan to play rook e1 or to go knight d5 and take with the e pawn, which I know you asked about later. But with that in mind, then I think it makes sense to have the rook there instead of the queen. And we can talk about why that will be coming up. So play queen e2. Bishop e1 seemed like a nice move. It gives you more stability when playing knight d5. Your a pawn's well protected, and yeah, it seemed good.
I tend to call those Grandmaster moves, Mac, when you put a bishop on the first rank.
Yeah, GM move, definitely. It's like king h1.
Right, always
Or
good, king
so
h1.
like unclear reasons, but just like a grandmaster move. So this still looks good. I think you have just a big advantage here. Like black doesn't really have any active plan. Typically, I would think they would want to do something like a6 and b5 to get some activity for their pieces, or like try to chip away at your big space. But even that's hard to achieve here, and it just looks like you kind of have like total freedom to do what you want, which is really nice. Okay, so probably this is the first useful serious moment to talk about. So you took this way, and even after this, you have a big advantage. I mentioned it earlier, but I think this is kind of the standard way to take. And I think the reasoning behind that would be it creates this backward pawn on e7. So I think that's one of the first benefits. So you can do a plan like rook e1 and with your queen here even to target e7. It prevents black from exchanging some pieces too, and that can oftentimes make their defense like a little bit easier. Is since they're so congested, if they can just swap a bunch of pieces on the c files, sometimes it makes it easier for them to move around in their cramped position, which is one benefit for them. But also, I'm not sure where this knight's going to go, but white has other nice plans here after the knight moves. So actually, I would assume actually it probably goes to b8 here. At least from b8, it's going to reach d7 where it's on a more normal square and it's more comfortable. But once you have this pawn on d5, you can kind of use it as like a little bit of a wedge pawn. You could potentially go for plans involving b4 and then c5, gaining space, and then if you manage to play c6 eventually, you kind of just completely dominate the queen side. You're turning your pawn mass into this really dangerous, like kind of avalanche of pawns here on the queen side. But there's a side like a side benefit to doing all this in this position too, which is that you open up your bishop. And actually, I think there could be like the makings of a potential attack on the king side too. You have much more space in the center. You could potentially, I think it's hard to do currently, but like one plan you might even think about is pushing your h pawn, which is somewhat of a common plan in these types of positions, where if you could eventually get your pawn to h5, you really weaken their king side pawn structure. So you have a lot of space you can play on either side of the board. But I think the main plans would be b4, c5, use the e file, potentially play on the king side if black is still passive. Hopefully that helps answer some of this. But
One way I like to think about this, and maybe let me know if you agree or not. If you take with the c pawn, it's almost like you're kind of playing for one advantage. You're just kind of playing for the space edge, but everything else is symmetric. But if you take with the e pawn, that feels like you're kind of playing for multiple advantages. You have the extra space, but then you have the e7 weakness, and you have like the queen side pawn break too. You know, you can kind of keep your opponent guessing. Whereas c takes d, it just looks like more of an exchange Slav in a way where you're just trying to milk like one small space edge and that's it.
yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah, it's like additional advantages basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And Andy agrees with you. He's saying ganging up on e7 sounded like a good idea.
yeah. I know I've already mentioned it, but yeah, this plan with b4 c5 is really hard to meet too, because one natural thing black might want to do, I guess even here already you could probably just get c5 in, but if they're even to try sorry, a move like b6 just to potentially hinder your plan, it also weakens c6 now too, so you might end up with this good outpost here if their knight tries to get back in the game. It's just a really unpleasant position for black. So your opening has gone really well here.
He says in the next 10 moves it started to go downhill.
Sure. Yeah. It's kind of easy for that to happen because it's not like there's a really clear plan here that white should be trying to do. It's like you want to use the C file, but it's also just like kind of like one-dimensional in a way. Yeah, black's idea to reroute the knight here makes sense.
I feel like black has played really well these last few moves too, just improving all their pieces.
Yeah, definitely. This bishop's not perfect, but it seems like their plan to improve it and trade off the bishop here is actually kind of a normal one and a strong plan here for black. They're doing a good job not to worsen their position and making things difficult for you. Yeah, I know he asked about kind of creating a plan, like probably around like just in general in this middle game portion. Mm,
Yeah, 21 through
I,
29, he said his advantage slipped because he couldn't figure out the plan. Black reroutes his knight while he didn't have much to do, and he struggled with his kind of positional type structure. What would have been a good plan was, yeah, that's his question.
sure. Okay, so my thinking here would be my first thought was to try to play a5, which would keep the queenside structure the way it is. I couldn't really put my finger on it, but like a resource the computer eventually said later on was something like a5 and like queen d8 to kind of loosen up the rook on c5. c5. So I think if you play a5 or sorry, let's say yeah, like a5 yourself at some point here, excuse me. I think it would help make sure that your rook stays kind of cemented on this very strong square because number one, like black doesn't want to trade. They don't want to play rook c5 because you can potentially recapture with your pawn and just their position crumbles at that point if their knight's forced back. And obviously it's just quite good for you. Another plan was to play f4, but I'm kind of thinking back to this thing I said earlier where I'd like to improve one of your improve a badly placed piece if possible. One plan that's jumping out to me is that this bishop doesn't really have a good purpose right now. So just looking at it off the top of my head, I was thinking potentially a plan like g3, and then, as you said, the Grandmaster move, bringing the bishop back to the first rank, then over to h3. I think at least that potentially could help find a good purpose for your bishop. And if you're putting pressure on the c8 square and they have to give up control of the c file, I think that could potentially be very meaningful here.
I really like that idea, hurting c8. Yeah. Andy
Yeah,
says,
I think it's always. Sorry, go ahead.
oh, he just said, oh, wow, never considered routing the bishop over to h3.
Yeah, I'd be curious if the computer would. If you don't mind, I'm going to turn on real quick if the computer would like such a plan. It might need to like black's trying to play queen h6, and maybe we have to specifically like deal with that. But if they were to just play a slow move, just curious. Like okay, so computer kind of likes maybe playing g3. I wonder if it's potentially with the idea to play like f4, but also it doesn't hurt to have the option to play bishop f1 and bring it back around. So that's interesting. But
Sometimes those kind of
yeah,
plans, it's like maybe the computer can defend it for black, but the practical chances are really good. Like a human trying to find that how to defend against bishop going to h3 is pretty difficult.
yeah, absolutely. I also like it because it's more of like an intuitive plan that you can use in these structures with the Maroczy bind, because your bishop oftentimes is like the one piece that struggles. So if you can just keep that in mind, it's like could be like the kind of idea that helps you in more than one game. It just yeah, always helps to improve your pieces basically. Okay, so they played queen g3. Yeah, so around here, this knight. Yeah, this is a good maneuver. Your opponent played well in this portion of the game, definitely. Oh yeah, this is where the computer found this idea of a5, which I couldn't quite, like I said before, I couldn't quite describe. It just felt like intuitively that like it was probably best to prevent black from playing a5 at some point. But here the computer found this just like beautiful idea to take and then play queen b8, which is, so precise and kind of unnatural looking for a human, but it creates multiple threats, which like one would be to play queen a7 and try to use this play on the diagonal as one very attractive idea, but also to play knight g4, which is incredibly powerful. So I don't blame either person for not seeing this, but it's like, yeah, it's just really nice and instructive at the same time.
Yeah, it really goes after those
Beautiful.
dark
Yeah.
squares.
Yeah, absolutely. So he played b6 though.
And on 33 again, he mentions he couldn't find a good plan. And he thought he might as well trade heavy pieces because his king was a bit more vulnerable than the opponent's.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, there's this well, like this positional idea that in general, like a queen and knight work better than a queen and bishop together. Also, unfortunately, White's light squared bishop is just, you know, not a great piece in general. So I'm trying to kind of balance out like how the rook trade might affect things, because I'm thinking maybe if you trade rooks, maybe it allows Black's queen and knight to coordinate more effectively, and it's like more clear that like that these pieces will be able to work together better than the queen and bishop here. But it's hard to come up with a better plan, like I think he said. So yeah, the computer like bishop e5. I wonder if it's to help. I wonder if even like bishop c6 at some point might be an idea to kind of jam up the queen side a bit.
That's what I was thinking. I almost wouldn't want, too many heavy pieces coming off because I know that knight is going to dominate the bishop long term.
Mhm. The rook on a8 is a pretty passive piece, so potentially allowing it to just remove itself could help Black too. And Queen's not all that active yet, at least too. One idea, I guess, from after bishop e5 would be this bishop c6 idea, and then maybe you could target the a pawn after that, or use the b file.
Yeah, that's a nice idea. Get the rook on c5. I didn't think of that.
Yeah, I still think Black will potentially try queen h6, and if the queen can get involved for f4, it's still tricky here for White. It's not easy at all. I think the way you said it, like sometimes I think you can sum up what I'm trying to say a little more effectively. But yeah, I think if the rooks just trade itself, it's easier for the knight to dominate the bishop here. It's like more of a like the bishop is a bigger portion of White's remaining pieces, and it's not able to do as much.
Well, and I think like I feel like Andy had the right idea. If your opponent's attacking
Mhm.
you, you want to trade off the attackers. But it feels like it's the queen and knight that are kind of Black's best attackers, whereas the rooks weren't really involved in the attack. Um, but I think the idea is right, trading off the attackers.
Yeah, that's well said. And then from your opponent's perspective, I guess the mistake they kind of end up making here is a bit of a classic one. It's like you in pursuit of your own advantage, you kind of like take some risk and then complicate the position and end up like spoiling things, and eventually your opponent wins. So I'm wondering like how exactly that ends up happening here. Well, I looked at it, but I'm not sure like where the big turning point was. But like what he's doing here seems pretty reasonable. Potentially getting knight g4 seems like very strong play, but at the same time, you're to give you the this deep pawn is at least you have something going for you here for your trouble.
It feels very risky for Black to just allow this passed pawn.
Yeah, yeah. Excuse me. So queen e1 would this be interesting here.
Oh, Andy did have a question on 39. He
Mhm.
said, I don't think
Sure.
Black has enough around my king, so why not push the passed pawn to create counterplay? Is this reasonable? And
I
I
think it's
think,
definitely reasonable. If the computer's saying d6 is inaccurate, it's must be some kind of concrete variation here that is the reason why. But generally, I think it's really practical to push the pawn. It's causing difficulty for black, and if there's no obvious reason not to do it, it seems like a good way to play. And I think the practical advantages of it kind of show in the game. It's difficult for black to find a really accurate way to take advantage of this position here. Yeah, I'm trying to figure it out here, like what black should have done better. It's not obvious to me, but the computer clearly likes queen up 21. I guess I don't know. I wouldn't want to have to deal with something like this. Like
No.
this looks a giant pain, like, or even like 93, tempting active move, but I don't see anything very definite here. Maybe I'm missing something, but
Yeah, he
yeah,
does.
I think the practical counterplay is very good.
Andy does say he couldn't find anything conclusive for black after the game. And someone in the chat says, what about queen h4?
Yeah, queen h4, then they would just be repeating basically. So
Mm-hmm.
in,
Yeah,
that's
this.
just probably something white has to live with here. There's, if black wants perpetual, they just have to deal with it. But a couple of moves ago, black had a nice advantage because this bishop was struggling. So it would be like a good turn of events for white. So they would probably be happy with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, queen h4 will get met by moving the bishop, and then kind of is what ends up happening in the game here.
Yeah, Andy says in the
So
chat
black,
he would have taken the draw at this point. Makes sense.
yeah.
And at 44, he said, no idea why black takes and then resigns. If he plays the obvious knight f7, the engine says it's winning, but it does look complicated. What's the best plan to win from there on 44?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so black takes. I had the same question actually that he was wondering. I turned on the computer. I wish I just like automatically knew the best answer in every position. But computer was saying to play king d2, which seemed really unnatural to me. I guess black is actually like struggling to make some moves here. It seems like. But
Is bishop e2 an idea, or why do we need?
yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
confusing.
I was thinking bishop e2 would be an idea, and then like potentially what I was thinking the computer was trying to get at with this move would be to play g3, because I think what the computer doesn't want, and what also like my interpretation of it would be something like king, like, okay, so trading queens would make sense potentially to help reduce the chance of a perpetual or well, it's a natural type of thing to consider here. But then black's king enters the game and becomes a better defensive piece, creates maybe some counterplay. So I think with the computer, like, my take on it would be that it wants to play bishop e2 and then go g3. So let's say black were to play, I don't know, knight d8 or something. It's like a kind of waiting move, like bishop e2, maybe g3 here, because then like a good defensive idea for black would be to try to somehow get the king back into the game to help cover the d pawn. But if black plays f5, then you can just shut it down with e5, and this king kind of stays locked out of the key area of the board.
So yeah, we're trying to make black capture on e3. That is pretty deep.
Yeah, but also I wonder then how that would play out if black chose a move like h4, which helps to prevent g3. Yeah.
Do bishop e2 check, king g5. And now the black queen is pinned. Maybe king d3. Oh, but then the knight's coming into check. I don't like that as much. I was
Oh yeah,
thinking if
yeah,
we break the
yeah,
pin, maybe our queen goes to c5.
yeah, yeah.
But that's not good. Yeah.
You still could wait here. It's kind of funny. You can play a move like bishop f3 or bishop d1 if you want. These pieces are stuck.
It's a weird Zugzwang.
Still can't play f5 because e5 can happen again. This knight's overloaded, so it can't take. It's this weird situation. I think black would almost be in Zugzwang here. They would need to probably play knight. Actually, I wonder then, okay, rather than go to f3, if maybe we try putting the bishop here this time, trying to cover some squares. But I feel like there should be something more obvious than this. I guess I still not completely convinced that this is right, but probably at the right moment. Then also you may consider like king d3, improving your king again, and then potentially, I guess, taking at a certain point and then trying to bring your king in.
This is kind of like what we were talking about a little before the stream started, Mac, where it's like you look at the Stockfish eval, 6.57 it's saying in the notes after knight f7 44. That's a really complicated 6.57.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. And actually, I guess the computer is even thinking here to, actually,
yeah, let's try this idea.
Okay. Yeah, computer likes this bishop d1 thing. So we're kind of analyzing this.
King e2, wow.
I wonder if queen, okay. Okay, so we could try king e2, maybe more exacting move. And then, yeah, then we okay, so that's not working because of here. This king is just, I guess, a weakness still. Yeah, this king is a really awkward situation. Black can't afford to take because their king gets boxed out. But they can't really keep their. But it's also exposed to checks here, so there's like these tactical problems. Yeah, so they could try king g4, like it's saying, but king d3, and then okay, the computer wants to keep the queen on the board and use it to maybe get the knight out of the way. To be perfectly honest, yeah, this is still, I can find it hard to figure out the correct plan here, but from your opponent's point of view, it's like impossible to understand why they would rather play knight d7 and resign when there's still work to do after knight f7. It's still tricky, but it seems like it's interesting to notice that probably you're going to need to use a combination of advantages here, like their king being a little bit more exposed, keeping your queen on the board at the right moment to potentially try to get the knight out of the way. Yeah, it's practically difficult though with the knight blockading d8, it's like wrong color bishop and everything, so tricky. Interesting though.
That was a fun game and really interesting Zugzwang endgame. I feel like you can almost do a whole analysis just on that endgame, half-hour video or something.
Yeah, I'd want to think they were doing a game for a while too to come up with a plan. It's hard to figure out after just a little analysis. Very cool.
Thanks for submitting that one, Andy.
Yeah, thanks.
Should we go to Sideshow Bob next?
Sure.
So Bob's,
I thought, what were you saying?
Oh, I was just going to say Bob's playing the black pieces, and I think he is still in the chat.
Great. I think he mentioned this in his notes to the game, but he got to play the note movement variation, which is very exciting because it's so rare you get to play it, but it's such a cool variation, like very imbalanced position, which I'm imagining people who are watching this may not be familiar with the note boom. Yeah, it's this variation of this triangle Slav where black gets to take, and it leads to this really imbalanced position coming up. So these are all book moves. White's trying to undermine the queenside pawn chain so that they can regain their material. Black takes. This is necessary to help cover b5 and make sure the knight doesn't recapture. Black takes. And white is supposed to play the move b3. And it works for this one specific move here, because if black's next move allowed them to protect their a8 rook, then they would be able to play b4. But yeah, b4, definitely doesn't work here. White just takes. So white has this move for this turn here that allows them to regain the pawn, but it's not the end of the story, because black pushes, and this position becomes really exciting. I think it'd just be really fun to play some games like this. And actually, since you're looking at this from black's point of view, or since we're looking at it from sideshow Bob's point of view here, I recently got the chessable course on the triangle, Slav, and they were proposing to try this new idea here. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they suggested you can even play bishop e4 here, which is a decent move, trying to eliminate this good bishop that white has, and then you can lock up some of the light squares in the center. You definitely don't have to do that. There's knight d7 here, which is the main line, and a good continuation.
So we do have a chess goals course on this. And I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember the move order, but our black course against d4, we call it the dynamic Slav, and it's the triangle, and we go into note boom. So I think Bob is kind of following that repertoire. I'm going to look it up
Awesome.
while we're
Exciting.
analyzing.
Good opening. Yeah, fun. The one thing I would also just point out, just as, okay, we're getting kind of deep into this line here, but is that I think usually you're trying to meet the move e4. Like, this is one of white's main plans here, is to get e4 in, because if they could turn this central pawn mass into this attacking avalanche again, then it would be just really overpowering. So usually you try to freeze their structure with e5, and then, well, so I think it can be pretty common to play queen c7, just helping to set up this move e5 in response to e4. But a lot of people with white, like, this is the one plan they can kind of recognize as being like natural, and they try to go for it. But it can actually lead to like the weakening of this d4 square, and then if white gives up the tension and plays in like d5 or take, black gets this really incredible knight on c5. They're from c5, the pawn is ready to go to a4, and black has a great position.
Would you say like one of white's biggest advantages is the bishop pair, like prior to playing e4?
Yeah, the bishop pair is a useful advantage. In general, like their space is pretty nice to have here. The potential to get their center pumps going. I got sort of sidetracked while I was thinking here, but one other idea that you might find helpful with black is that I think I saw a game that Hikaru Nakamura was playing with black. I think it was against John Ludwig Hammer, where it could have been a position really similar to this, where basically in these positions also black has this tactical theme that if you, like, when the knight moves from f3, that you can sometimes arrange a4, because if they take, you have queen c6 here, which is a really nice tactic, hitting a4 and then g2 threatening mate.
Oh yeah, I just looked it up. F4 was played, and then I moved 16 and then A4 in reply. This was, yeah, this exact position.
Cool. Yeah. So I don't know. I actually think it's not so easy for white to play, because they have the bishop pair, they have this big pawn center, but it's like a little unwieldy trying to like manage all these things. So knight d2 is pretty natural, because you want to play e4. Maybe a move like rook e1 could be an idea, I suppose, too. Oh, actually, yeah, computer really doesn't like that, but okay, I'll try out the computer. I'm not trying to have the computer think for us, but yeah, I think it's not easy to get this to work well for white. It's like their natural plans have some drawbacks too. Anyway, probably focus more on the game, but
I like the night boom note boom analysis, not night boom.
The night boom.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have the knight pair instead of the bishop pair. So
Right.
the knight move. But okay, anyway, your opponent he doesn't play b3, so you get this significantly improved version. The computer also points out that after bishop e7, white should play d5. And it makes a lot of sense. Like if white can't regain the material, they should play to make the most out of their bishop here, and opening up the bishop on the dark squares is really natural. Plus, if they take, maybe they weaken black's structure a little bit. So the computer is actually saying like you should probably try knight f6 here, which I think there's a good chance your opponents might not know to play b3 again. So you might be able to use this. I think if white were to try b3, you could play knight d5 or knight e4, and then take advantage of this loose bishop again. I'm trying to make sense out of what the computer would want here, but it looks it is supposed to be like much better for black here. But okay, so bishop e7. I like the way you handled this part. Okay, so the computer is not thinking knight e4 is like totally accurate, but I think in general trying to block the light squares makes sense. It would be tempting to exchange bishops since you're ahead in material and you get rid of the bishop pair, but white still gets more active this way. So I think your way was better. In
What do you think
general, I
of
think it's a good
queen
play.
d5 after that trade? Bishop f3 takes, and queen d5.
Oh, okay, yeah, that'd be nice to try to make work. I think
Oh,
an issue here would be the a pawn.
yeah,
Yeah, in
okay.
principle though, if you could just lock up the light squares, that would be great. Yeah, preventing some of the other ideas for white. Knight e4, queen c2. Yeah, around here you're doing great. It's like the opening just worked as well as you could hope. Looks
Yeah.
wonderful.
I feel like white was nervous there. They saw the bishop getting kicked and they were thinking, well, I can't just retreat because c3 is getting played. And that
Yeah,
leads to sacking the bishop.
it's true. But imagine that you're sitting here with white. The prospects would actually just be like, okay, you play bishop e2, maybe c3 happens. Like honestly, maybe giving up the bishop for the two pawns is like a better positional antidote than having these pawns just.
Yeah.
This is a nightmare. Like bishop's hardly going to do anything later anyway.
You need some practical chances for white.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe it's better just to take like they did. It's definitely not good for white, but yeah. And I think you already mentioned this in your notes that I think you said you missed 93. Yeah, it's hard to. They say that the backward attack moves are the hardest ones to find. So we get so focused on our like normal way of thinking, like we want to stay active and keep advancing, but 93 was a good move by them, and it's difficult to maintain the pawn here. But you mentioned knight c6, which is a good move. That way, 93, your pawn's covered. Would be going for what you're trying to accomplish here anyway with the piece trade. So I think you already picked up on that. But it's interesting that like a lot of people can have that kind of blind spot because it's just not as natural for us to think about our opponents retreating with the threat. Yeah, here your opponent misses a chance to take. Like the computer saying, I think queen e7 also would have been a natural move, trying to protect b4. It's useful to connect your rooks. White might be tempted to play a move like c5 to help disconnect your queen from the b4 pawn, but I think in general, like these moves sort of help black because they give you more control of the light squares and more squares to use you're either a bishop or a knight on, which would be helpful at some point. Maybe either of these pieces could use the d5 square. Yeah. So we end up kind of seeing the same situation come up. I was telling Matt before we turned on the call here that like some of the ideas that are like very strong have already been like pointed out in the analysis or the notes of the games. Here is where one of those ideas I think kind of pops up. So I think you mentioned knight g4 being a good move here. And it's good that you were already able to analyze your game and go through it, because I think, yeah, knight g4 is a very good idea. Creates this pressure to h2. If they take this structure change, I think is really helpful for black because it gives you a clearer source of counterplay. I mean, you're already have the advantage, so it's not like you necessarily need counterplay, I guess, but you have more direct play with like rook f8, targeting f2, which helps to take away some attention from white being able to try to push this c pawn. I wonder even if black might entertain some ideas like starting a pawn storm on the king side too.
Yeah, it did feel almost like Bob was a little bit stuck in terms of what to do with the plan, prior to this exchange on g4.
Exactly. Yeah, good point. So this helps make it much more straightforward. Yeah, so you traded. It's not easy to make progress here, I think. This pawn being so well protected and white having no clear weaknesses. It's not obvious to how to progress here, but I think getting the queen to the open file here and then potentially trying to trade seems pretty reasonable to me. And then once that happens, it'd be easier to bring your king in to help get it activated and watching over the c pawn. And if they were to maybe like deny the queen trade, you might even be able to play something like rook f8 and then use your queen actively on the second rank. So I think trying to activate it here and use the b file makes a lot of sense.
Where do you want your king in this sort of endgame as black? Like, are you looking to put it on c6? Trade off queens, put the king on c6, or do you want the king kind of in the middle?
I think once you trade queens, probably just even e6 is perfectly fine, just close enough to be watching over the pawn. Depends where white ends up putting the rook as well.
Okay.
I think there's a good chance they're going to want to keep it on c1 so that you can't use the first rank for black either. But if that happens, then yeah, probably you need to bring your king over and block the pawn. Actually, in general, in rook endgames, this obviously isn't a rook endgame, but just because it's related, I think usually your king is the piece that wants to be doing the blockading, like never the rook. And then once you do that, it frees up your rook to create active plans. So if we were to trade queens here, I think bringing the king in front would be really natural, pretty standard.
Okay.
Yeah, so you go this way. Yeah. It's kind of interesting here. The computer likes rook b5. To me, trading rooks, it's like a pretty normal idea if you're ahead in material, but actually seems like maybe white's king is like not quite totally safe. If you play rook b5, maybe you have ideas like rook queen b8, rook b1, like rook b2 or queen b2 afterwards. And probably trading rooks here doesn't necessarily help black too much. It's more about trading the queen so that there's never really chances for a perpetual, and the queen is a better piece for trying to support this pawn being pushed. Like it can, like this happens later in the game, but like the pawn goes to c6 and the queen ends up on b7, so it can help try to knock away the blockading piece. But the rook wouldn't really be able to do that. So probably trading rooks here is actually not all that beneficial. More about keeping some active possibilities like queen b8 ready, or queen b7 even.
That's a nice way to think about it. Like, how do the queen and pawn work together for white, and how do the rook and pawn work together for white? In terms of like figuring out which pieces we want to trade off.
Yeah, this seems natural. c6. Yeah, it's a pretty committal move. It's not necessarily bad, but it's, the pawn's a completely secure pawn on c5, so it's never an issue there. But I would think that if white plays c6, it should be attached to like something very specific where they get like good counterplay. They're turning this like long-term advantage they have into like a potential weakness here. So I feel like it's a very serious choice for them to do something like this.
I wonder if white did think maybe they were winning by force with queen b7, or getting up their pet
Yeah.
at least.
Hmm. Oh, yeah. So you can trade. It might be difficult to calculate it all out, but white's pretty far from having any serious counterplay here. So it might look a little not so ideal to have to bring your knight back and then spend a couple of turns to gather the pawn. Like maybe white can try to muster up some counterplay here. I'm just trying out some moves that look normal. Yeah, I think you can keep the counterplay under control. You can try to box out the king. You're going to be able to take, and if your king makes it back in just a couple moves, you'll be in good shape. White could try to puncture a way through on the king side, something like h5. Or this is one thought I had at least for what white might try to do.
It seems like the hard thing
But
for white is they're trying to trade the two kingside pawns and the two center pawns, and there's just not enough time to do it all.
yeah, definitely. And they have some time to bring their king in, but the moment they take one of the h pawns, you may even play knight f6 and bring it to g4, and then yeah, you're right. It's like I was just thinking maybe they want to get it like a passed g pawn as counterplay, but that's going to be slow, and they can't exchange all these pawns. It's a little asking too much for this king.
I mean, it almost works. Like if black was, let's say the d pawns were off the board or something. I mean, white's
Mm-hmm.
probably drawing.
Yeah, that's true. I analyzed a couple more moves here, but I thought this was a fun little idea that you're, instead of them just taking all your kingside pawns, you're actually going to start turning around on them. Something like, well, and knight g4 is coming. But
Yeah, that
anyway,
is cool.
yeah, black is winning. Okay, so we're at this point, and then king d6. They should have played queen a8 here, keeping the queen on the board. And then anytime you take, they could try queen f8, or at least keeping the queen alive to get some counterplay. Instead, what did they do? They played f3, but yeah, you can take. Now it's even clearer than before. Yeah, if your king's just rounding up the pawn, and it's pretty hopeless for white here. So you could just flip through the moves, but yeah, you won without any trouble. So good job.
That's nice technique by
Sorry.
Bob, cutting off the king.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just no fun for your opponent. You're even gonna queen with check here. Yes, perfect. Knight f5, very accurate.
Oh, nice. I like that, Bob.
Like zigzagging them into mate and one.
Very nice.
Very good. Nice. Cool. Good game.
Good game, Bob.
Yeah, I wonder how often too you get the note boom. I don't know if it happens a lot, but
I mean, when I play the triangle, I almost never see both knight f3 and knight c3.
hmm.
Um, Almost everyone just plays knight f3 and they're going for like a Catalan or they'll go e3 right after.
Gotcha. Yeah, be nice if you could force your opponent to do it.
Yeah, I mean,
If you
no
both
boom's
play one
really
position.
no boom reminds me of like the Berlin defense at club level, right? Where it's like you could have all your theory down for the note boom or all your theory down for the Berlin, but you'll just never face it. Like no one quite goes far enough into the theory.
Right, right. That makes total sense.
How are you
Or
doing on?
some.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, yes, I feel like someone told me that like Aronian, the super high level grandmaster, he uh he knows the Marshall Gambit like really well, and he like keeps all the analysis memorized, but like he literally gets to play like once or twice a year because no one will actually go into the Marshall Gambit. They'll do all the other sidelines and play the Italian games and like that. It sounds the
That's
same.
I mean, Marshall Gambit, what wasn't that pretty popular like back in the early 2000s? Like you would see it top level chess or not as much.
Yeah, yeah. I I think it could have been. It definitely like computers show that it's just like completely fine for black, I think. So probably if you want to try to beat it and like avoid all the forcing lines, you have to do something different a little earlier. Yeah. Anyway, we could go through this last one here. I probably should maybe end in like 10 minutes or so if that's okay. But
Yeah, so Skirish was playing the black pieces, so he was the one that submitted
that's
the
right.
game.
Yeah, I know one of the things he asked in the comments to the game, I think, was like what he should try to improve on. It seemed like the opening was good here. He knew the proper responses. Also, he could play knight c6, and that's just leads back into like a traditional opening. Bishop e4 is perfectly fine. To just answer that question that I or the thing I brought up there, I think from what I've seen, it looked like some of the tactics were probably the best thing to work on, which we'll see coming up. Uh, Here also, when white played a3, I think this is a good chance to take and then play the move d5. Like seize control in the center here. It's a little awkward for white because it's difficult to deal with the pressure on e4. Like queen e2 is one way to guard it, but it's weird for them to defend it like this and not that natural. Knight d2 is another response. It's probably okay, but still seems like white or black just has like a very pleasant position here. Can choose a number of ways to continue and doesn't really have any difficulties. Um, but if white were to trade, yeah, it kind of looks like white black is actually playing the white pieces in some sort of e45 game, and it's the board is like turned around or something. But it seems like like black has a good opening here, just good control to center, open and active pieces. Totally fine. So I think it's not a big thing, but yeah, that would have been helpful. Okay, so all right, b4. 95 would be interesting in trying to set up the center fork trick. But anyway. Actually, I don't usually like having people put their bishops on this diagonal. Like from black's point of view, you're likely just to play d6 here, create this very solid pawn chain, and the bishop is going to be closed here. Uh, from white's perspective, something like bishop g5 or bishop e3 seems to make more sense. I was also wondering, actually, at this point, before white even has the chance to play bishop e2, it seemed to me like there's this chance maybe to play knight g4. I
Ooh,
I like how it looks.
yeah, it feels like
Just
a
looks
reversed
difficult.
Roy Lopez almost, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Yeah, kind of like fried liver type of
Right.
possibilities here too.
Reversed fried
But yeah, for
liver.
black, it looks like this is good. Um, but I think the theme though that I was seeing is that just like some of the mistakes in this game, like the most important moments, were dealing with forcing variations and like spotting active moves from both players. So if I would suggest trying to focus on that if you're like looking for ways to improve, like looking for parts of your game that would um, deserve attention to. So d6. Once bishop e2 happens, there's not really knight g4 ideas so much anymore. So I can just castle. A6 makes sense. Like this is a common idea in these types of positions to help avoid losing the bishop pair to knight a4. So that seems perfectly reasonable. I think rather than play bishop e6, I would suggest you just castle right away. That's only a small thing, but you can just maintain flexibility this way, and then I think no matter what, you definitely need to castle. Other plans you actually might choose instead of even bishop e6 would be something like knight e7 over to g6. Oops. Where your knight potentially has a good outpost on f4, and you can also try to play like c6 and d5 next to have a nice center, and your knight on g6 helps to guard e5. It's a lot of arrows here, but basically the knight on g6 is a pretty helpful piece. You allow your center pawns to move. So I think I would probably prefer that. Well, it's a small thing, right? Not a major thing, I would say. So knight a4. Yeah, you play b5 here. I could see why you'd want to slow them down on the queen side. I don't think it's actually something you need to be too scared about, though. The move b5, I don't actually think it's necessarily too helpful for white because it's going to end up like, let's say you were in a castle. If white were to play b5 here, you can trade. I think black could actually be happy with this exchange since it splits up white's pawn structure, and white ends up capturing away from the center here, which, like, let's say after knight e7, then you bring your knight around to g6 again. I think white might actually want this pawn at c4 here, helping to guard the d5 square. And I don't think this trade is actually so bad for black. Okay, so yeah, you play b5, and then yeah, this is where it starts to get uncomfortable for you because the b5 pawn's a little loose, and your opponent does a good job putting pressure on it with a4 here. I think this is a nice move by them. So you're left with this choice. You can try to resolve the tension here on b5, but this actually ends up hurting you. Another potential idea would be to take, but it's difficult because this b5 pawn is under a lot of pressure, and you can't really protect it. Probably another reason why b5 should just be avoided a little earlier. I think, yeah, having your king kind of stuck in the center here isn't helping. It's like there's this pin, the knight's a little loose, then this bishop is stuck, being defended by the knight. Yeah, so here white's able to win some material. I think you try your best here to make the best of it. So you do manage to find this kind of interesting tactical sequence. And then after taking, you get the queen. And this is such an unusual material imbalance with 3 minor pieces and a rook for a queen and 2 pawns.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but it's a lot of material for white. It's a lot of minor pieces and a rook. But at least from black's perspective, there's nothing easy in your position to attack right now. All your pawns are well protected. They help limit some of white's pieces a bit. So it's not like white's position is like a straightforward win here or something. It's a little more challenging. So they play king g1. Yeah, seems natural. They want to bring their king back. I like actually at this point that you play queen g4 from a practical point of view. If you are behind a material, or if you sense that you're at a disadvantage, a lot of times it's best to just look for ways to create kind of like chaotic positions and dangerous plans for your opponent to deal with, since like there's a better chance they make a mistake that way. It also takes the game away from being like a one-sided advantage where, you know, if you're just purely defensive in a much worse position, you have nothing really like there's no like silver lining or something that can go your way. It's just you're just defending. Here at least if white makes some kind of mistake, like your plan is with knight h5, f4, gives them some like specific problems to solve, which if they don't, you can end up with a good position or better position than before. So you get this plan in. They play rook f2. They definitely were anticipating your pressure on g2, but now they have to watch out for knight h3 also. Maybe they had some tactics in mind here with knight e5, but you're able to win back some material, which is nice. So you take on e2, then you're rid of the first threat to the queen, then you take on e5. And yeah, I think things are going a little bit better for you here. Another thing which, like as the defending player here, you might want to keep in mind is that the more material and pawns you're able to reduce from the board, I think the harder it is for white to start targeting things to like I think from their point of view, they want to capture some extra material, maybe use one of their pawns to make a queen. I think it would be a lot easier to win that way than like trying to launch some kind of attack with their knight, rooks, and bishop here. So as some more trades occur, yeah, I think this definitely helps you. So yeah, just as an example. Well, okay. Rook c7 is a blunder, but okay, it's gonna lose to queen d1 and then black is the knight. But
It does feel like there's kind of more and more chances for white to go wrong as we progress. Like the king is open for white, there's back rank ideas, pieces could become loose, and there's no pawns to create that passer.
yeah, exactly. And I think this would be like a good example of how that starts to go wrong for white, because with all the pawns just being on one side of the board here, it's not so difficult for black to try to keep them defended. It's like more and more simplified. So they try knight g3. And here at some point, okay, you're able to win some material back. Okay, queen d6 runs into rook g7, which was a nice tactic that your opponent didn't see. But yeah, unfortunately, you can't really take because you lose your queen to knight f5. But after king h8, knight f5, still white just holds everything together, and this is yeah overpowering now for white. This knight is just a monster. So they go back. I'm going to end up going through these moves a little quicker here. But your opponent does make a big blunder, which is always helpful. So you know you worked your way back into the game here, which was excellent. You managed to just be resilient for a while, and so at this point you offer a draw, which is I think a perfectly reasonable draw offer. In fact, I don't think you really have any chance to lose this game anymore, because if white ever wants to try to make some kind of progress, I don't think they could really do anything other than, you know, eventually try to double up on the 7th rank or something. They have to target something to capture, you know, hopefully after they make an escape square. But you'll always have perpetual checks, and yeah, you're totally fine here. It's like almost no chance to lose. But your opponent is rook c3, which hands the game over. So
I feel like the
always
draw
nice.
offer was the best move on the board, right? Yeah, like you said, you offer the draw, the opponent declines, they overpress, and they end up losing.
Yeah, instantly. Yep.
That's great. Well, thank you for sharing this game.
Yeah, thanks. It's fun.
All right,
I
so I
like the
think,
material imbalance.
yeah, that was just crazy. I've never seen one like that. What was it? Rook and 3 minors for 2 pawns and a queen?
Yeah. hmm
Jeez.
I had a game once that was very similar. I think it was like a rook and two minors or rook and three minors against one of my friends named Teddy Coleman. He was going for an IM nor he needed to win the last game. So I played this very weird opening against him, or I played a pretty aggressive variation. So we both had some chances. And at some point, he was in time pressure, and I can't actually say the words he used because it's there was some there's a bad word in there, but he actually stood up over the board. It was like a queen and seven pawns against like a rook and like three minor pieces or something like that. And he said so many pawns, a special special word there.
So many bleeping
Um,
pawns.
yes, yes. It's like this is awesome. This is my one of my favorite moments at the chessboard.
I'm gonna have to find that game. Maybe you can send it to me.
I've looked for it so many times. I don't know if I still have. I remember the tournament it's from too, but I don't know why it's not in the database. I wish I could find it.
Oh, that
But
would be
if
cool
I
to
can, I'll
see.
send it to you. That'd
Okay.
be great.
Well, Mac, I want to really thank you for doing this. This was awesome. I know members really appreciated seeing a Grandmaster review of their games. Super cool. So thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun.
And
So sending the games in.
and Mac's website is linked in the description. It's grandmastermac.com, and he offers group lessons, individual lessons, does some teaching at camps, and he likes to just keep in touch with his students. So even if you're thinking about maybe doing a lesson this fall or this winter, or you have some event coming up, check out Mac's website, reach out to him. I'm sure he would love to help out. And yeah, any last words that you want to say, Mac, before we sign off?
No, not too much. That I think you said everything perfectly. But yeah, I'm always if anyone who happens to see this wants any extra help, just feel free to reach out like about anything. There's like a little form on my website which you can like even like add in some special comments, like if you're looking for an opening or maybe you need some kind of like very specific help. I'm happy to try to do whatever I can to help people's chess. So
I told Mac before we started too, I was like, I might need some help here based on my OTV results. So I might be reaching out too.
yeah, I feel like as chess players, there's always it's like we all need work. It's just and it's like I don't know. I feel like as an adult, I played so much as a kid. Like the rating was always going up all the time. Then when you get to like adulthood, it's like like improvement is hard. It's not easy.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to end the stream now, Mac. Maybe stay
Sure.
on for just 1 minute until the stream
Sure.
ends, and then we'll say bye. Okay. So thanks everyone for watching, and have a good rest of your day. Bye, guys.